Hi, again. Another video and lecture I wanted to talk about this morning is copper in our bodies, brains, cells, biochemistry. I studied that in an animal lab model looking at Alzheimer's plaque formation in light of transition metals in our drinking water: copper, iron, zinc. We know a lot more about zinc and maybe iron than we do about copper and what I study, manganese, the magic metal, the voodoo metal. Why do they call it that? It's very unpredictable. It's origins of life, biogenesis metal. You also find it in this metals-based bacteria called Gallionella, Gallionella, that you find around iron ore mines. It's bacteria, it's alive, but it's metals-based. Iron, manganese, running water, sunlight, and I think those are the basic ingredients for Gallionella to form, to be created out of nothing. Metals-based bacteria. Very similar in many ways, visually and constitutionally, to our own mitochondria. Makes sense? Makes sense to me. Good. So what I want to talk today about is copper. And copper was just one of the metals. Very, very interesting metal. In that there is an interplay in embryogenesis. During the microcephaly in northeast Brazil issue around 2015 that mushroomed 9 months after the San Marco iron ore mine exploded. 50 million gallons of iron, manganese, aluminum sludge poured into the drinking water environment and also into the Atlantic Ocean. That definitely had a play out in ocean life that I observed. Haven't studied that yet, but these supersized sharks started showing up around these iron ore mine runoff disasters. That iron is buried for a reason. We need to be very careful how we sludge it into the environment. But in Brazil, this iron ore mine burst, and there's a whole trajectory of information before and after that iron mine burst, company records, etc. And they would cloak it with aluminum, really toxic. And then, lo and behold, that sole drinking water source leading up to northeast Brazil, where all of the cases were, that's a thing. So that's a huge part of the metals that I've studied. Now, copper has its own thing. Many of us may know that copper surrounds the MRI magnet. Manganese is in there, it's involved. I can't talk about that now, but I know copper contains the signal. No signal, no copper, the signal just goes into the netherworld. Copper has the ability to maintain signal in these neuroscience readings and fMRI, as it were. And it's also involved in the first trimester of embryogenesis. Copper and zinc and copper, protecting the integrity of the embryogenesis needs. No iron or manganese. Doctors who are giving women iron, I think that needs to stop. This is another RFK topic of interest. Women are supposed to be anemic. That's how nature created it. That's how embryogenesis made it, because that first trimester, really 4 months, is a very protective environment. Iron is magnetic. Manganese is also magnetic. And they're very involved with the mitochondria that are surrounding the embryo in diploid shells. They haven't fleshed out, they're just waiting for the iron, for the oxygen, iron floodgates to reopen. They're waiting patiently for this incredible, almost anti-gravitational, it's almost like embryogenesis happens way out in outer space where there's no gravity. Fascinating. That's zinc and copper. Copper is protecting that signal. Very interesting that COVID did not last on the COVID virus did not survive on copper railing. Do you remember that? When COVID came out, one of the early findings, I've done about 70 lectures following COVID in light of mitochondria, where COVID was cleaved at the 3 and 5 dimer part. It was cleaved in sick mitochondria. I don't know if anybody remembers that. That's my takeaway, and I followed it very closely. So I recently graduated from Hopkins, and they were doing most of the research and putting it out there. I was also in the very first conference announcement where microcephaly was announced to the world. And I met the health officer of Brazil and asked him about the metabolic needs of the mosquito, because everybody thought it was a mosquito. But I saw those brain scans. I love brain scans. I went to so many lectures on, because fMRI was right out of the box when I started studying, and everybody didn't know. And I was like staring at them. I was like, just everything that was being said, I was like, what is going on in that brain scan? I can't get enough of looking at the scans. And I saw those scans that had those calcifications along the development of the neural, not the neural crest, but in that area of brain development where it's so affected by the microcephaly problem and calcifications. And I thought, that's manganese involved in that problem. Because manganese calcifies. It splits oxygen out of water and calcifies, builds bone. Well, in embryogenesis, you don't need to be calcifying yet. Not time to calcify. And yet there it was, calcifications. So that first conference, and I think it was January 15th, 2015, I was there. And they were talking about the mosquito, da-da-da-da-da. And I was immediately like, is there manganese mining in this northeast Brazil area? Lo and behold, there's all sorts of mining. And a huge catastrophe that happened leading up to a massive rainfall that bled into the drinking water source to northeast Brazil, where you would find iron ore, toxic sludge runoff, iron and manganese, and they cloaked it with aluminum. Causation. Where there's causation, all you find is evidence. I then I graduated from Hopkins, about 1,500 hours peeling this apart, and stand by my findings that this toxic iron ore runoff, bleeding, and the practices, they eventually showed the dam that held these tailings burst. well documented. But leading up to that, we had a 2-year drought, no rain, and they're just pouring their excess sludge. They're overproducing by about 10 times, about 8 times, and throwing it into the environment because the ground was dry. And then it rained, and that rain sucked right into the drinking water source leading up to northeast Brazil. And iron and the color of the water they drink up there, bad news. Iron and manganese, they use manganese and water to bore iron out of bedrock because manganese is so dynamic. It cleaves oxygen out of water molecules and particulates in the process. So in order to get out bedrock, get manganese and water, that's how they get iron out of bedrock. And the consequences are the microcephaly that ended up in the drinking water in northeast Brazil. Okay. And then, in second and third trimester, after the 4-month mark, great, bring in the iron, bring in the manganese, the body brings it back. Women are anemic early on. And that's what doctors are treating, think they need to treat, but in reality, the body needs to be anemic in that precious 4-month super space, anti-gravitational, copper and zinc spurring all the processes that create the embryo. Once it pops into the fetus, it's oxygen dependent, and we need that mitochondria to move in and populate. These are researchable facts. And I spent some prime, good, probably 1.5 years doing this work. And the mosquito, the larvae, there may be opportunities for it to slip in there and be present. But causality, in my research, are these metals that were seeped into the environment. Okay, back to copper. Copper is very important, and it protects the integrity of what's going on at any particular place. It surrounds the magnet in the MRIs to make sure the signal comes back, It also, a very good friend of mine, Gene Kellogg, was the executive director to create the Hilton Center in Manassas, Virginia. And it's an incredibly sensitive acoustic hall. You go in and there's a symphony playing. It's covered in copper. And that copper, none of the music sounds, nothing slips out the roof, as it were. Because it's covered in copper, the integrity of the sound, when I first sat down, it was like in my bones. I could feel the music in my bones. It was and that's copper protecting resonance and activity and vibration that should be very much involved in first trimester. Once you throw iron, these paramagnetic elements, including oxygen, is paramagnetic, into the mix, you are compromising the outcome. And that may explain issues of cognitive impairment, perhaps, maybe part of the autism spectrum concerns. Iron does not belong in the first trimester. The natural course of healthiest evolutionary embryogenesis and childbearing is what it should be naturally. Thanks for listening.